The night was thick with fog, and the ancient stones of the royal palace held a silence so deep it seemed to breathe. Somewhere within its forgotten corridors, a flicker of candlelight danced behind heavy curtains. While most of the kingdom slept peacefully, the queen had summoned the dead. Queen Zara of Jehanabad was young, regal, and unlike any ruler the kingdom had seen before. When her father, King Salim, died mysteriously 5 years ago, she had taken the throne with grace, but her reign had never been free of whispers. Some said she was gifted, others said cursed. The rumors became impossible to ignore the night her mother's voice echoed from the royal tomb. That night, the guards outside the royal crypt reported strange chanting and then a woman's voice weeping inside a voice that matched the late Queen Rahama's. It was said that the queen had knelt beside her mother's resting place, her fingers pressed to the cold marble, eyes closed, murmuring in a tongue no one recognized. After that night, Queen Zara made her claim boldly, "I can speak to the dead." The kingdom was stunned. Priests called it blasphemy. Scholars were baffled. The commoners, however, were caught between fear and awe. The royal advisors pleaded with her to retract the statement, fearing rebellion or worse chaos from within. But Queen Zara only smiled and said, "Let them come. I have nothing to fear." From the living, soon, stories began to pour out of the palace. A thief who'd escaped justice mysteriously turned himself in, whispering that he'd been haunted by the voice of the king he betrayed. A soldier who lost his hand to a cursed blade claimed the queen, spoke words that made the pain vanish. A maid swore that the queen had called her into her chambers and told her things about her dead. Brother no one else could be known. People started lining up outside the palace gates, bringing letters to the dead, names of missing loved ones, requests for forgiveness, even curses. The queen began holding midnight whisper sessions, as they came to be called private audiences, where she would speak with the dead on behalf of the living. But behind the marble pillars and velvet curtains, not everything was as it seemed. In the west wing of the palace, a young scholar named Kaif, newly appointed to the royal library, was growing suspicious. He had read of old rituals and forbidden knowledge once buried by the ancestors of the very empire Queen Zara ruled. And he had a terrible suspicion that the queen wasn't speaking to the dead. She was summoning something else. Kaif was not a man given to superstition. Raised in the scholars' quarters of Nurasand University, he believed in ink, logic, and evidence. But after just 3 months inside Queen Zara's palace, his conviction had started to fray. He had seen the candles burn backwards. He had heard whispers without mouths. And once, late at night, he'd followed the echo of a voice down a hallway, only to find no one there, only an old mirror fogged by breath from the other side. Kaif had been summoned to the palace to catalog the Silver Archives, a collection of ancient books and scrolls that dated back to the founding of Jehanabad. What he found disturbed him more than he cared to admit. Among the yellowed parchments were records of rituals banned centuries ago, rites that promised sight beyond the veil, and incantations that required offerings of blood and memory. One parchment mentioned a forbidden's title, the Mirror Queen. The text was partly burned, but the legend spoke of a royal woman who once used her beauty and status to open a doorway into the realm of echoes. It was said that when she spoke, the dead answered, but in time they demanded more than words. Kaif closed the scroll with trembling hands. The Mirror Queen had ruled over 300 years ago. Queen Zara's bloodline traced back just as far. The next morning, Kaif requested an audience with the queen. To his surprise, she agreed. He was brought to the Chamber of Petals, a marble-walled room filled with slow-burning incense, where the air was thick with silence and rose-scented smoke. Zora stood at the far end, her black robes trailing the floor like ink. Her eyes were steady, intelligent, and strangely unreadable. "You requested my attention, Master Kaif?" she asked, her voice like calm thunder. He bowed low. Yes, Your Majesty, I have read some disturbing accounts from the old archives. History is often disturbing. That's why it hides in books, she replied with a faint smile. Kaif stood upright. Some of these accounts mention a mere queen, a woman who, like you, claimed to speak to the dead. She vanished, leaving no heir and no corpse. Only silence. Zara's expression didn't change. She walked slowly toward him, her fingers gliding over a brass candlestick, eyes never leaving his. Do you believe in ghosts, Kaif? He hesitated. No, but I believe something is speaking back. The queen tilted her head. Good. Then you understand. Understand what? That not all ghosts are dead? A chill passed through Kaif's spine. Kaif couldn't sleep that night. The queen's words kept echoing. Not all ghosts are dead. He turned them over in his mind until dawn's first light spilled across the palace courtyard. When the bells tolled morning prayers, Kaif went straight to the palace scribe, an old man named Farid who'd served Queen Zara's father. Kaif found him hunched over a ledger, quill scratching quietly. Master Farid, Kaif whispered urgently, tell me what you know of Queen Zara's childhood. Farid looked up with weary eyes. Why do you wish to dig up such things, boy? Because I fear something terrible has returned to this palace. Farid set his quill aside. He glanced around the empty scriptorium and lowered his voice. The queen was always different. As a child, she would wander the royal graveyards at night, talking to the air. Servants claimed they heard two voices, but saw only one child. By dawn, she'd return with stories of secrets she couldn't have known. Did her father know? Kaif asked. Farid nodded gravely. He tried to stop it, but the night he died, she was found asleep in the family crypt. She woke up smiling. A gust of cold wind swept through the windowless room, rattling old scrolls. Farid shivered and crossed himself. There's something else, he added. 3 nights ago, I was delivering papers to the Queen's study. I heard voices, men's voices, chanting in a tongue older than our oldest books. When I looked inside, the Queen was alone, facing a black mirror. Kaif felt the blood drain from his face. A black mirror was a known object of necromantic rites, used to summon and trap spirits. Farid grasped his arm with a bony hand. You must leave the palace while you can. But Kaif's mind was already racing. If Zara truly was communing with forces beyond the grave, the kingdom itself could be in danger. That evening, as the sun set in crimson flames over Jehannabad's domes, Kaif stood in the palace gardens watching the queen's tower. A dark shape moved across her window, flickering like a dying candle. Then he saw it, a second shadow beside hers, tall, thin, head crowned with horns that shouldn't exist outside nightmares. Kaif staggered back into the hedge. His heart thundered in his chest. He knew in that instant that Queen Zara wasn't only speaking to the dead. She was inviting them back. Kaif walked the rest of the night like a man caught between sleep and nightmare. By dawn, the palace seemed different, more brittle, like a grand painting stretched too tightly over a frame that had begun to splinter. The servants whispered more often now, avoiding mirrors and lighting lamps even in the middle of the day. Worse still, a hush had fallen over the whisper sessions. The queen no longer made public pronouncements. She now met petitioners only at night and alone. One by one, her inner circle was reduced to silence. General Varen disappeared. The high priestess fell ill and left for the southern temple, never to return. Even Zara's own cousin, Prince Romai, was said to have fled across the sea. Kaif knew something had shifted when he saw the palace cats gathering near the Hall of Mourning. Cats were said to be able to see what humans could not, and their hissing, tense stares at empty corners filled Kaif with dread. He returned to the scrolls. Day after day, he pored over every document tied to the mere Queen Maharan, the last ruler who'd claimed to speak to the dead. There was only one eyewitness account of her fall. a court poet who described the queen looking into a black mirror and speaking in voices that did not belong to her. The voices gave her power, prophecy, and madness. Soon after, Mahiran sealed herself in the Tower of Petals just as Zara now had, and when her body was found, it was untouched by age, yet her hair had turned white as bone. Kaif made a decision. He had to know more. That night, while the queen was conducting a secret whisper session, he entered her private library. The room was filled with books bound in shadow-colored leather and stitched with gold thread. On a velvet pedestal he found it, a dark obsidian mirror veiled under black silk. The moment he touched it, the air changed, cold, thick, as if the room had dipped underwater. Whispers began, almost too soft to hear, then louder. "Who are you? Watcher. You do not belong here." Kaif's hands trembled, but he pulled back the veil. His reflection did not move. It stared back at him with widened eyes, its lips unmoving. Yet Kaif could hear it speak inside his mind. "You opened the path. She is not the first. She will not be the last." Kaif stumbled back, covering the mirror with shaking hands. But something had already passed between them. When he turned to leave, the queen stood in the doorway. "You looked into it," she said quietly. Kaif opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His voice had vanished. Zara gave him a sad smile. "Then now, you two will begin to see them." The silence in Kaif's throat felt alive, like something had nested inside it. Every time he tried to speak, his lungs moved, his lips shaped words, but no sound emerged. It was as if his voice had been stolen by the very mirror he had dared to touch. Queen Zara stepped closer, the folds of her silver robes dragging across the marble like whispers. "It's frightening at first," she said gently, "but you'll get used to it. They'll come to you now. At night, when it's quiet." Kaif tried to write something on his palm, but she stopped him. "You don't need to ask questions. The dead are already watching." That night, sleep did not come easily. The shadows in Kaif's room grew long, curling like fingers at the edges of his vision. He shut his eyes, but the darkness behind his lids was worse. There were faces there, flickering in and out, mouths open as if screaming silently. The air felt heavy, thick with the scent of wet stone and old smoke. Then the cold came. A chill so sharp it made his teeth chatter and his skin ache. The candles sputtered out one by one. And then a voice. Not heard, but felt. Inside his mind, inside his bones. "Kaif, you shouldn't have looked." He sat up, breathless, heart pounding. In the far corner of the room stood a woman in torn mourning robes, her skin the color of parchment, her eyes like empty wells. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. Instead, Kaif saw the memory play before him like a living painting, her being dragged down the palace corridor. Accused of poisoning a former king, screaming her innocence. No one had listened. Now her spirit lingered. "You must tell her," the voice whispered inside him. "Zara, she's slipping away." By morning, Kaif's voice had returned, rough and cracked. But something deeper had changed. He wasn't just a historian anymore. He was becoming a conduit. In the days that followed, the dead returned. Some arrived slowly, shy and flickering. Others burst into his vision with anger, sorrow, despair. Kaif began scribbling furiously, documenting what they showed him, what they begged him to remember. Queen Zara would visit him at odd hours, asking for his notes, reading them aloud like sacred scripture. Her eyes shone with fevered joy. "They speak to us both now," she whispered once, "but they've chosen me to finish what Mahiran began. To break the wall between worlds." Kaif's stomach twisted. He remembered the old scrolls. Mahiran, too, had believed she was chosen. Until she vanished into her own reflection. He had to find a way to stop this, but how do you fight what can't be touched? In a hidden corner of the palace archives, Kaif found something no one had read in decades, a brittle letter. unsigned, wrapped in silk, and sealed with wax bearing an unfamiliar crest. It was addressed simply, "To the next one who listens too closely." His hands trembled as he opened it. The ink was faded, but the words were etched with desperation. "She will seem kind, she will seem broken, but she is not your friend. The dead do not speak, they scream. And once they've learned to scream through you, they never stop. Zara is not a queen. She is a door." Kaif read the letter again and again. It confirmed what his instincts had begun whispering. Something inside Zara had opened that should never have been unsealed. He started noticing the cracks. At first they were small. The queen muttering to herself in the gardens, her shadow moving slightly out of sync with her body, a mirror in the eastern hallway shattering when she passed by, though no one touched it. Then there were the voices others couldn't hear. A young maid claimed she saw Zara speaking to thin air and weeping like a child. A guard found her barefoot in the crypts, chanting the names of long-dead kings. When questioned, she laughed and said, "I was only dreaming with my eyes open." But Kaif knew it was more than that. The mirror in his own chamber had changed too. Each night, the same face appeared, a boy no older than 10, silent, eyes wide with terror. He never spoke, only reached forward as though begging Kaif to pull him through. The historian began sleeping less, afraid to close his eyes and find the child crawling out of the glass. He tried to leave once. He packed a bag, penned a resignation letter, and walked toward the gates of the palace. But when he reached them, they weren't there. The walls seemed endless. The halls twisted back onto themselves, and every window looked out into the same thing, mist. Thick, unmoving mist that swallowed light and sound. Kaif wasn't in the real palace anymore. He was in her palace, Zara's palace. A place shaped not by stone, but by memory, regret, and something much older than grief. One night, as he sat beside a single candle, Kaif heard the door creak open. Zara entered, barefoot, her eyes glowing faintly. "I want to show you something," she said. She extended her hand, and Kaif foolishly, fearfully took it. They walked together to the Hall of Echoes, a chamber forbidden to all. It was lined entirely in black glass, floor to ceiling. No torches, no guards. Only reflection. "This," Zara whispered, "is where I listen best." And then the mirrors began to breathe. Kaif stood frozen in the Hall of Echoes, the queen's hand still clutching his. The air turned heavy, thick like water. Around them, the glass walls pulsed softly, as if alive. He could see his reflection, yes, but behind it, there were others, hundreds, no thousands, faces half-formed, mouths open, eyes closed. Some were weeping, others just stared. And one by one, they began to move, pressing forward against the inside of the mirrors like drowning souls struggling toward the surface. "I don't command them," Zara whispered beside him. "They find me." Kaif's throat was dry. What are they?" "They are the ones who were never buried. Never mourned, forgotten, some call them ghosts. But they are older than ghosts. They remember what the world forgot." The mirrors began to hum. It was a low, sorrowful sound, like the groan of earth before it swallows the dead. Zara stepped closer to one of the panes and touched it gently with her fingers. Instantly, a ripple spread across the glass, like water disturbed. From behind the reflection, a voice spoke. "Faint, childlike, mother?" Zara gasped and smiled. "Do you hear him?" She asked Kaif, her eyes glistening. "He speaks so clearly now. He's learning." Kaif stared at the boy's face, pale, solemn, the same one from his mirror. "Who is he?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled back, and the mirror settled. The reflections returned to stillness. Kaif backed away slowly, heart pounding. "This isn't mourning. This is something else." Zara turned sharply. "Do you think grief obeys rules? That there's a right way to suffer?" He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Zara, these souls, They're trapped. No. Her voice was quiet, dangerously calm. They're not trapped. They're invited. I gave them a door. I let them be heard. Taif shook his head. But what if they never leave? Zara smiled faintly. That is the price of listening. In the days that followed, Kaif felt reality fraying. He couldn't remember what day it was. Sometimes he'd wake up and find sand in his shoes, though he hadn't left his chamber. Once, he caught a servant walking backward through a hallway. When he tried to speak to her, she vanished, just vanished, like mist in sunlight. He began dreaming in other people's memories. A soldier crushed beneath a siege tower. A girl watching her village burn. A mother dropping her baby into a river to save it from invaders. Each night, the dreams grew louder. And in every dream, he heard the queen whispering, "Remember them." Kaif noticed it first at the evening feast. The usual music was absent. No minstrels played. No servants laughed. And most disturbingly, no food was served. The long tables were laid with plates of ash and bowls of salt water. When Kaif asked, a maid whispered, "They don't like music anymore, sir. It hurts their ears." She didn't respond, just turned and walked away, trailing shadow behind her feet. The next morning, Kaif sought out the oracle. He had heard rumors of her, an old woman who lived in the garden crypts, blind, half mad, but older than any living soul in the kingdom. Some said she'd been buried once and clawed her way out. Others said she had never been alive at all. He found her sitting on a stone bench beneath a dying olive tree, her eyes clouded, her voice low and musical. "You are the scribe?" she said before he introduced himself. "Yes," he said. "I need answers." She turned her head, though her blind gaze was empty. "You seek to understand the queen." "I want to know what she's become." The oracle laughed bitterly. "Not what child, who, she was never Zara. She only wore that name." Kaif's blood chilled. "What do you mean?" The oracle reached into her robes and withdrew a shard of ancient mirror, black as coal, rimmed with silver veins. She was chosen by them, marked. Her grief opened the door, a misstep through. Kaif took the shard and stared into it. His own reflection stared back, except the eyes were not his own. They were golden. Flickering, watching, they speak through her, the oracle whispered, but they do not care for the living. Only memory, only pain. They feed on sorrow. Kaif's voice trembled. "Then she's possessed," the oracle shook her head. "No," she agreed. "That's the horror of it." She begged them to stay. Back in the palace, Kaif confronted Zara. He found her in the throne room, sitting silently. The mirrors had now been placed all around the pillars, turned inward, forming a cage of reflections. "I know what you've done," he said. "You made a pact with the dead." Zara didn't flinch. "I invited them. There's a difference. They're eating this kingdom alive." Zara's face softened, but not with remorse, with sorrow. "Isn't it beautiful, Kaif? A kingdom that remembers every death, every injustice, every forgotten name." Kaif stepped forward, voice rising. "But the living are fading. They walk in dreams now. The children don't speak. The rivers have stopped flowing. Even the sun sets too soon." Zara stood, the mirrors quivering around her. "They were forgotten," she said. "I gave them a voice." "You should be grateful." Kaif's hand went to the mirror shard in his pocket. He didn't know yet what he would do with it. Only that something had to be done before the kingdom was swallowed whole. Kaif began to keep a journal secretly, using scraps of old parchment he hid beneath the floor tiles of his quarters. Every night, the palace grew stranger. The chandeliers now dripped with wax, even when unlit. The corridors smelled faintly of smoke and lavender. The servants never blinked. And Kaif no longer dreamed. Or rather, he no longer remembered his dreams. He remembered other people's dreams, faces he had never seen. Voices whispering of lost children, of broken hearts, of wars that had never happened. The dead were not just speaking to the queen anymore, they were spreading. One evening, Kaif snuck into the queen's mirror chamber. No guards stopped him, there were none left. Inside, the light bent unnaturally. The mirrors, now hundreds of them, were angled, so that no matter where he looked, he saw Zara. Zara young, Zara dead, Zara crying, Zara smiling with blood on her teeth. He stepped forward and realized she wasn't in the room, not in flesh, only reflections. The real Zara was somewhere else, but these mirrors had become doors, echoes, remnants. He approached the largest one and touched the glass. It rippled, not like water, like skin. He jerked back. And then the reflection spoke. "You've seen too much, Kaif." It was her voice, but her lips hadn't moved. "You can still leave," the mirror whispered. "Forget what you've written, burn the journal, walk away. And I'll let you keep your name." "My name?" he asked aloud. But there was no response. Only the sound of 100 people breathing in unison. From inside the mirrors, Kaif fled the chamber. That night, thunder raged over the city, though not a drop of rain fell. He climbed to the bell tower, the highest point in the palace. The bell had not been rung in years, not since the queen's mourning began. There, he found a child. A girl, perhaps 8 years old, standing barefoot in the rainless storm. He asked her name. She said nothing, only pointed at the tower walls. On the stones, names had been carved into the surface dozens, hundreds of names. Some Kaif recognized. Others were foreign, dead tongues. One name shone faintly in the moonlight, Kaif. Underneath it, scribe of the forgotten, one who listens. Soon to be remembered. The girl turned to him, her voice ancient. "She marked you when you wrote your first word for her." He stared at her. "What do you mean?" "You're not writing about the dead," she said. "You're writing for them. You're the ink in their veins now." Kaif stepped back, trembling. "No, I never agreed." The girl smiled gently. "But you listened, and then she vanished, not into air, into smoke." Kaif returned to his chamber, but the journal was gone. In its place was a single page. One word written in the queen's hand. Soon. The next morning, the capital woke to silence. No birds. No market bells. No prayers from the temples. The city was holding its breath. Kaif, now known only in whispers as the queen's ghost scribe, walked the marble halls like a man lost in fog. Servants he once greeted no longer met his gaze. They moved like shadows there, but not there. The queen had not been seen in 3 days, but her voice was heard. Every night at the stroke of the 9th bell, her voice would echo from the palace walls, chanting names, forgotten lullabies, verses in languages no one living remembered. The people stopped questioning. They feared speaking ill of her, of Kaif, of the voices. Because those who spoke too loud ... vanished. Not publicly, quietly. Their homes were found empty. Their clothes folded neatly. Their mirrors ... shattered. Kaif received a summons delivered by no hand. The message simply appeared on his table, written in fresh ink. The veil grows thin. Come to the chamber, tonight. He knew which chamber. The veil room, a hidden place at the heart of the palace, spoken of only in fragments, always with fear. A place said to exist between this world and the next. That night, he entered through a spiral staircase that had not existed before. At its base, a heavy door, cracked open, breathing cold. Inside, the room pulsed with something ancient. There were no candles, yet it glowed with dull, blood-colored light. The queen stood at the center head bowed, hair like ink spilling over her shoulders. Around her, the dead. They stood in silence, faint figures, transparent, mouths moving without sound. Some were weeping. Others simply stared at Kaif. He stepped inside. "You called me," he said quietly. The queen lifted her eyes, and Kaif felt a cold ripple in his chest. "No, Kaif," she said. "They called you." She held out a small, broken mirror cracked down the center. "Take it," she whispered. He did, and in it, he saw himself, but not as he was. He saw himself sitting on a throne of ash. He saw crowds chanting his name and then screaming it in terror. He saw his hand raised in power and then soaked in blood. He dropped the mirror. It did not shatter. It simply vanished. The queen stepped closer. "They want you now. You listen better than I ever did." Kaif's heart thundered. "You said I could walk away." "You promised." The queen touched his cheek. Her hand was ice. "No one walks away from the dead, Kaif. Not when they know your name." He fled the chamber, but the palace had changed. The corridors were not the same. Doors were misplaced. Windows showed nothing, no sky, no moon, only shifting darkness. And behind him, the voices grew louder. Not whispers now. Chants. 100 names. 1,000 regrets, all pouring through his mind like floodwaters. In the streets outside, the city statues had begun to bleed from the eyes. Kaif didn't sleep that night, not even after escaping the veil room, because escape was a lie. Even in his private quarters, lit by fire and guarded by armed men, he heard the whispers. They no longer came only at night. They spoke from the water basin, from behind the curtain, from the lines in his own palms. He tried to write them down, but the ink bled red. The paper curled. Words vanished as soon as they were written. And still, the queen remained silent. No public audience, no royal decree. Only her voice chanting each night, summoning someone or something. The high priests grew afraid. The royal guard trembled. Even the stars over Althera looked wrong, misaligned, shivering, like they too feared what was unfolding. And then came the storm. Not of clouds, but of crows. Tens of thousands darkened the skies over the palace, perching on rooftops, gates, and spires. They did not move. They did not blink. They watched. People covered their mirrors. They painted holy symbols over doors. But protection was no longer possible. The veil between life and death had grown thin, and it had holes. Kaif, in desperation, returned to the one person he had once trusted, the blind historian. Moran, who lived beneath the palace archives. Moran had not been seen in years. Kaif found him sitting in a circle of bones and candlelight, surrounded by scrolls so old they cracked when the air moved. "You came," Moran whispered. "I prayed you wouldn't." Kaif fell to his knees. "What is happening to me?" "You are becoming." "Becoming what?" Moran turned his face toward him, white eyes glowing faintly. A bridge, a voice. A throne for those who were forgotten. Kaif's breath caught. "I didn't ask for this. No one asks," Moran said gently. "But the dead are lonely, Kaif, and you hear them too well." The queen had once said the spirits chose who listened. Now, Kaif understood. He wasn't just the listener, he was the invited. That night, the queen summoned him again, but not through ink. This time she came to his chamber. Her skin was paler. Her lips had no color. Her eyes were not hers anymore. "Come," she said, voice layered with other voices, men, women, children, beasts. "I'm not ready," Kaif whispered. "You are. You must be." He followed. Down, past the royal vaults. Down, beneath the foundation stones. Into the place called the skin of the city. A living tunnel, flesh-like, pulsing, lit by lanterns that dripped wax made of marrow. The walls whispered. The floor breathed. And all along the path, names were carved into the meat. His name was there too, already etched. At the center, a throne of bone and candlelight. Empty. The queen turned to him. "This is yours now." Kaif stared. "If I take that seat," he said slowly, "what happens to you?" She smiled so softly it ached. I returned to silence. Kaif hesitated before the throne. Bone white, polished smooth by time or touch. It pulsed faintly as if it had a heartbeat of its own. "Why me?" he asked. Why not you? The queen stepped aside, her shadow trailing behind her as though it resisted the movement. Because you still belong to both worlds, she said. I have crossed too far. Kaif's fingers brushed the throne. In an instant, he saw everything. 1,000 years of whispers, coronations, murders, confessions, the deaths of kings, the curses of beggars, mothers weeping, children singing, lovers screaming in grief. The voices of Althor's dead were not silent. They had simply been waiting, and now they surged toward him. His scream never left his lips. Instead, the sound folded inward like breath being sucked into stone, and when he opened his eyes again, he was seated. The throne accepted him, and the dead bowed. The queen knelt at the foot of the throne. Now you understand, she whispered. Kaif's voice echoed strangely as though two people spoke at once. What have you done to me? Only what was asked, she said. The throne was never meant to be empty. Someone must listen, and you? She smiled, fading even as he watched. I will rest, for the first time in decades. Her body grew translucent, like mist under moonlight. Kaif reached for her, but his hand passed through. The queen dissolved into dust and silence, her form taken by the very air that once carried her voice. And just like that, she was gone. Kaif sat still, heart pounding in a borrowed rhythm. All around him, the throne room of the dead shivered, and the whispers began. Not in fragments now, but in sentences. Tell my son I forgive him. Bury me under the almond tree. The prince was not my real child. They burned the wrong witch. Find my ring. It holds the seal. Each voice clearer than the last. Each story pulling at Kaif's soul, his mind strained. His chest hurt, but he understood now. This throne was not about power. It was about burden. Days passed, or weeks. Time did not obey its old laws in this place. Kaif spoke to generals who died in their armor, to widows who waited on forgotten porches, to slaves who cursed gods they never saw. He became their memory, their mouth. And sometimes at night he heard the queen's voice fainter, now saying, You are not alone, I am with them. One day, footsteps echoed down the bone corridor. A child, a girl with one green eye and one brown, dressed in mourning black, but with golden leaves in her hair. She didn't bow. You're the one who hears the dead. Kaif nodded, exhausted but calm. My mother just died, she said softly, but she told me you'd help me find her voice. Kaif smiled for the first time in ages. He gestured for her to sit beside the throne, and so it began again. Kaif remained in the bone palace, rarely rising from the throne. His face grew pale like ivory, and his eyes took on a haunting glow lit by the memories of thousands who no longer breathed. But outside, in the world of the living, stories changed. The people of Althora began to speak of the man who sat on the throne of whispers, a prophet, a madman, a guardian of the dead. Some feared him, others made pilgrimages, and slowly, peace returned, because where the dead were heard, the living no longer needed to shout. Kaif was not alone. The girl who'd once sought her mother's voice, her name was Lena Stade. She grew into a woman beneath the gaze of bones and stars. She became his scribe. Every whisper he heard, Lena wrote, in books made of bark, stitched with sinew, bound by thread spun from spider silk. Soon, the entire lower chamber of the Bone Palace was a library of the dead. 1,000 tomes of regrets, confessions, secrets, and truths long buried. And through it all, Kaif whispered. And Lena listened. The peace is not made to last. One cold dawn, the dead stopped whispering. The air felt too still. The throne lost its warmth. Kaif looked up, alarmed. Where are they? Lena paused mid-sentence. You don't hear them? Not a single one. Panic prickled at his skin. For the first time in decades, the silence was too complete. And then it came. Not a whisper, a roar. The walls of the palace shook. From deep below, from catacombs even Kaif had never seen, rose a different voice. Ancient, angry, loud enough to splinter bone. You've heard the weak, but what of the monsters? Kaif staggered. He had never felt such fury. This voice did not come seeking forgiveness. It wanted recognition. It wanted out. And with it came the memories, not of kings or lovers, but of tyrants, butchers, and beasts who had died without ever being named. All their darkness compressed into one monstrous will. Cave clutched the throne. No, this place is not yours. But the throne trembled beneath him. You made it so. You opened the door. You made memory sacred, even ours. And then the palace cracked. Outside, Lena screamed as walls collapsed. Bones fell like snow from the ceiling. The books caught fire, not with flame, but with shadows. Black ink bled off the pages, words screaming as they melted. Kaif tried to rise, but the throne held him fast. He looked into the dark swirl of ghosts before him and saw faces twisted with hatred, shame, murder. The unrepentant dead had come to claim their voice, and Kaif had no answer for them. The black storm of voices surrounded Kaif. You gave the meek a name, now give us ours. They howled in dozens of tongues, echoing off each other like clashing swords in a battlefield of air. Their words tore at the very walls of the bone palace. The ghostlight chandeliers shattered, bones in the ceiling cracked. Statues wept blood from their stone eyes. Cave's skin blistered not from heat, but memory. Each voice stabbed into his soul. He saw villages burned by ancient conquerors. He saw betrayals so old they were forgotten by time. He saw a child left to starve so her father could feed his ambition. He saw evil, raw, undiluted, undenied. Lena ran to his side, her hands bleeding from where books had exploded in her arms. You have to shut them out, she cried. They'll destroy you. Kaif didn't respond. He had always believed the dead deserved to speak, that even sorrow needed a voice, but this was not sorrow. This was rage. This was a demand. This was a reckoning. And deep in the core of it all, he felt a presence, not a soul, but a force. Like an ancient king buried before kingdoms had names. It had no shape, no name, only intent. It wanted dominion. Cave's hand rose slowly. He reached for the dagger, the same ceremonial bone blade he had used to take the throne decades ago. It still sat embedded in the throne's armrest. He knew what he had to do. The throne is not a stage, he whispered. Lena grabbed his shoulder. Don't. But it was too late. With a sharp cry, Kaif plunged the dagger into the throne. A crack split the floor. A scream pierced the air. And the dead fell silent. Everything stopped. Not a whisper. Not a breath. Even the shadows froze. Kaif's body slumped forward, but he was still alive barely. And around him, the voices that had thundered now waited. You have silenced us again. Kaif's lips parted. No, I have judged you. For the first time, the voices faltered. He stood, shaking, blood pooling beneath his feet. There is no justice without discernment, he said. You are not forgotten, but you are not forgiven. A pause, a breathless hush, and then the storm dissipated. The spirits howled one last time, not in rage, but in defeat, and scattered into the cold stone. Lena collapsed, sobbing in relief. Kaif sank back onto the throne, exhausted. His skin pale, hair now entirely white. The throne no longer pulsed with voices. The bone palace had grown quiet again, but not empty, because in the silence, something new had emerged. Not the dead, not the damned, but balance. Kaif had passed the final test. He was no longer just the voice of the dead. He had become their judge. Kaif remained seated on the throne, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. The air had changed. It was still thick, yes, still cold, but it no longer hunted them. Lena stood beside him, her face streaked with sweat and soot, her voice trembling. Are they ... gone? Kaif nodded slowly. No, they're listening now, quietly, as they should have been from the beginning. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was awareness. The Bone Palace felt like a hall of waiting eyes, but the wrath was gone. The vengeance had passed. Kaif had shown the dead something they hadn't expected: limits. Over the next few days, the kingdom outside the Bone Palace began to change. The sky no longer cracked with unnatural thunder. The black birds that had swarmed the castle rooftops vanished. Dreams returned to normal. Farmers didn't hear whispers in their fields. Children no longer drew faces of ghosts in their sleep. And Lena, once terrified to even step foot beyond the royal library, now stood confidently in court beside Kaif. The people no longer called him a madman. They called him the Grey King, the one who had stood between the living and the dead and refused to bow to either. Yet power always comes at a price. Kaif's health began to deteriorate. His body aged rapidly, skin turning thin, bones aching with every step. His voice, once booming with authority, now echoed like distant thunder. Each night he sat in the bone throne, no longer to listen, but simply to remain near it. Lena confronted him one evening as moonlight slashed across the throne room. "You're dying," she whispered. Kaif gave her a tired smile. "No, child, I'm transforming. But into what?" He looked up at the ceiling where bones were carved into the shape of constellations. "Into what the dead need me to be." The council begged him to leave the palace, to pass the crown, to preserve his life. But he refused. And one night, without a sound, without a ceremony, Kaif, the Grey King, passed away in the very throne he had once stabbed. No one saw it happen. The guards noticed only when the lantern stopped flickering for the first time in months. He sat there peaceful, still, mouth closed, eyes open. And on the wall behind him, something new had appeared, a carving. It had not been there before. It read, "To listen is mercy, to judge is sacrifice." The Bone Palace was sealed after that day, not because it was cursed, but because it had fulfilled its purpose. The people no longer feared it, they respected it. Kaif's body was never moved. The throne room was locked. No one dared reopen the place where the dead had once screamed, and a single man had faced them and survived. But Lena had learned. She had listened, and years later, when the world began to forget Kaif's name, she opened her own book of whispers and found they remembered her. Lena became queen not through blood or battle, but through memory. When the council placed the crown in her hands, she did not kneel. She walked to the Bone Palace gates, placed her palm on the ancient stone, and whispered, "I'm not him." But I listened too. The winds answered her, gentle, mournful, and approving. Years passed, and under Queen Lena, the kingdom of Narvia knew peace, not because war vanished, but because the need for war was buried. She was called the Pale Queen, for she always dressed in gray, the color of ashes and echoes. Her court became a sanctuary not just for nobles and knights, but for the haunted, the grieving, and the forgotten. She reopened the royal library and turned one of its towers into a sanctuary of memory. There, she began to write what she called the Book of Whispers. It wasn't a history book. It was a record of messages from the dead. Each page began with a name, followed by a dream, a sentence, a plea. Sometimes just a single word, "forgive," or "still here," or more cryptic, "don't trust the mirror in the red room." Lena never explained how she received these messages. Some claimed she had inherited Kaif's gift. Others said she was the Queen of Secrets. Many believed she simply imagined it all. But when a merchant from the Far East read her book and found a message written in a language Lena could not have known, his dead wife's final words, people stopped knocking and started fearing. But Lena never ruled with fear. She ruled with presence. She would often walk the corridors at night, barefoot, humming lullabies she didn't remember learning. She'd pause at doors, press her ear to walls, whisper into cracks. She once told her maid, "The dead don't knock. They wait. We just have to hear them waiting." One autumn evening, a soldier returned from a lost battle. His mind was broken. He hadn't spoken in weeks. Lena visited him. She sat beside his bed and opened the Book of Whispers. She flipped through the pages and found one blank sheet. Then slowly she dipped her pen, looked at him, and asked, "Who are you waiting to hear from?" The soldier burst into tears. His lips trembled. And for the first time in weeks, he spoke, "My brother." Lena nodded. "Then we wait together." And they did, all night. At dawn, a single word had appeared on the page. "Safe." The soldier smiled, closed his eyes, and never opened them again. By then, even skeptics started to wonder, had the dead truly chosen a queen? Or had she become one by daring to speak to them without fear? The Bone Palace remained sealed, but sometimes travelers claimed to hear music inside soft, slow harp notes. Some claimed the windows glowed on moonless nights. Others said they saw a shadow on the throne, not Kaif's, not Lena's, but something older, a reminder that the throne had never belonged to the living alone. In the east wing of the Bone Palace, there was a room long sealed and spoken of only in whispers. It was called the Red Room, though none recalled why. It was Kaif who once wrote in a letter, "If you love me, do not open the door beneath the weeping cherub." Lena, after years of reigning, came to the statue one sleepless night. The cherub's stone face was stained as though it had wept blood. Beneath it, a rusted keyhole waited. She hesitated, remembering the words in her Book of Whispers, "Don't trust the mirror in the Red Room." But silence has gravity and curiosity its own momentum. She turned the key. The Red Room was circular, windowless, and warm as if it breathed. The walls were painted with a dark crimson, the shade of drying blood. In the center stood a mirror taller than a man, framed in obsidian. It pulsed faintly. And in it, Lena did not see herself. She saw Kaif, not as she remembered him, but older, more tired and sorrowful. He stood behind her reflection, staring not at her, but into some place beyond. Then his lips moved, no sound. She stepped closer. Kaif's eyes darted up. He saw her. This time, he truly saw her, and he screamed. A silent, desperate scream. Lena stumbled back, nearly knocking over a pillar. The room darkened. The mirror cracked slightly, not shattering, but groaning, as if insulted. She fled. Outside, the palace had changed. The halls looked older. Her guards did not recognize her. The world outside was not her kingdom. It was a reflection. She returned to the Red Room the next night, and again and again. Each time, the reflection showed a different version of Kaif. In one, he was laughing in a field of ash. In another, he was crowned in fire. In one, he was a child. And always, he tried to speak. Lena began to write her visits into the Book of Whispers, not as testimonies, but as questions. Why does the mirror remember him differently each time? Is it showing his past, or the lives he might have lived? Did the dead choose to speak through this, or was it never meant to open? One night, her reflection changed. It was not Kaif, it was herself, but not her as she was now. This Lena was older. Her crown was broken. Her eyes were hollow. And behind her, 100 voices whispered in 1,000 tongues. This Lena pressed her palm against the glass. And from her mouth came a single word, audible this time, "Run." Lena sealed the Red Room, but she knew it had already let something out. Something watching. Lena withdrew from court life after the Red Room incident. Her public appearances grew rare, her voice more cautious. To the people of the kingdom, the queen was simply growing older, wiser perhaps. But within the Bone Palace, the halls whispered of deeper changes. At night, Lena would hear footsteps echoing where no one walked. Mirrors misted over with breath when no one stood before them. The portraits in the East Gallery began to alter. Kaif's painted eyes turned away, and once smiling faces frowned. She began collecting stories, old legends, forbidden prophecies, and tales of mirrors that remembered too much. From a mute seer in the northern cliffs, she acquired a tapestry known only as the Thread of Cinders. It was older than her empire. Woven from ash-dyed wool and threads of bone, it depicted the fates of those who dared open gates between the living and the almost dead. In its center, a woman in a crimson room. Around her, flames, broken clocks, and figures trapped in glass. At the edge of the tapestry, stitched in gold thread, was a warning in a forgotten tongue. Translated, it read, "That which reflects the dead may invite them home." The palace maids began leaving their posts. The court magician, an old man named Varnal, asked for permission to resign and burn his books. When Lena asked why, he merely whispered, "Mirrors don't lie, but they do choose which truth to show." That night, Lena awoke to find her bedroom mirror facing her bed, though she had covered it with a velvet shroud. Someone or something had pulled it away. And in the mirror, her bed was empty. She wasn't sleeping. She wasn't there, just the room, and the sound of faint laughter echoing from the mirror's other side. There was only one person in the kingdom who might understand what Lena was experiencing. A recluse known as the Archivist of Ashes, who lived beneath the ruins of the first citadel, a place older than all maps, buried after the first war between kings and crows. It was said the Archivist had once served 7 monarchs across time, none of whom had ever ruled at once. Some called him a ghost, others a curse that learned to read. Lena, disguised in a traveling cloak and guarded only by silence, made the journey alone. She descended into the blackened bones of the old citadel, where flame had eaten stone and memory both. At its lowest depth, past 3 locked gates and a tunnel of whispering teeth, she found a room lit by dying lanterns. Dust fell like snow. The archivist sat beside a fire of smoldering paper, his skin cracked like burnt parchment. His eyes, though blind, turned toward her. "You open the mirror," he rasped. "The one behind the weeping cherub." Lena nodded. The archivist chuckled without humor. "Then you've heard it breathing, haven't you?" He offered her a cup of ash tea, bitter and dreamless. Then he began to speak, in fragments, as if recalling pages long half burned. "Mirrors were not made to show us. They were made to trap them. Memory has weight. Too much of it sinks through time. The Red Room was once a cage, not for Kaif, not for you, for something else." He told her of the Mirrored One, a being that had no name, only a voice that echoed the words of the dead. It could not leave its prison unless someone it remembered came back to see it. "You remembered Kaif too often," he said. "You summoned the reflection. You made it believe it had a door." Lena, shaken, asked, "Then what do I do? Burn it? Seal it forever?" The archivist leaned forward. "You've already let it in. A mirror is not the danger. The you who walks away from it is." She left with a final warning written on a strip of scorched vellum. "When you hear your name spoken in your own voice, do not answer." Back in the palace, Lena burned every mirror but one, the one in the Red Room. That one she buried behind walls of stone and salt. But some nights she still heard it, not calling for Cave, but for Lena, and the voice calling her sounded just like her own. The voice behind the mirror. For weeks, Queen Lena refused to sleep near anything reflective. The servants whispered about her new fears, how she ordered silver-polished dark, how she replaced the palace's grand chandeliers with candles dim enough to cast no reflections, but the darkness offered no safety. Because the voice was growing bolder, it didn't wait for silence anymore. It echoed even when Lena was in company, in court, in daylight. It mimicked her tone, her phrasing, her pauses. It repeated her private thoughts, moments after she had them, and sometimes it asked questions. If Kaif were alive, would you still be queen? Do you remember your mother's last scream? What do you see when you look away from your own eyes? Lena wrote each question down, fearing she might forget. Or worse, that she'd start answering. Then one night, the voice didn't just speak. It laughed. She woke in her chambers, gasping, certain someone had been standing over her. The laughter was fading, trailing like perfume, but it had not come from within her mind. It had come from under her bed. Terrified, she summoned the royal guard. They found nothing, but the guards themselves reported strange things. One said his shadow lingered behind after he left Lena's room. Another claimed the mirror in the antechamber showed someone else. His face for a split second, an older version of Lena with blood under her fingernails. Lena dismissed them publicly, but she believed every word. She returned to the red room alone. The stones she had sealed into the wall were cracked like teeth too long starved. She dared not open the mirror again. Instead, she knelt before it and whispered not a name, but a question. What are you? At first, there was silence. Then a slow scraping sound as if something inside was turning to face her. Then it answered, I'm the echo of everything you forgot. That night, Lena set fire to the red room, but as the flames rose, she caught her reflection in the glass just before the silver cracked. It smiled first, she didn't. The fire that consumed the red room was declared an accident officially, but within the palace, people knew better. The queen had been seen walking away from the inferno barefoot, set clinging to her gown, a strange expression on her face, neither grief nor panic, but something closer to relief, yet the damage had been done. Even without the mirror, something had awakened, and it was no longer content with whispers. The royal court began to crumble in subtle ways. Ministers forgot meetings they had never scheduled. Advisors lost their voices mid-sentence, as though invisible hands clutched their throats. One knight went mad, claiming he saw the queen weeping blood into a silver basin, but the queen had been in another city at the time. And Lena herself? She no longer dreamed, but she began to draw. Piles of parchment appeared beside her bed each morning, covered in symbols she didn't remember, writing glyphs that resembled bone cages, or fractured crowns, or open mouths lined with thorns. Sometimes her fingers were ink-stained, other times it wasn't ink. The palace healers whispered that the queen was sleepwalking, but the servants knew better. They had seen her writing with her eyes open, and they'd heard her speak, though no one was in the room. One day, Prince Darian confronted her. His voice trembled as he asked, "Mother, is it you?" She looked at him for a long time. Too long, then smiled. Who else would I be? But her eyes flickered, just for a heartbeat, and Darian saw it. There was someone else watching from behind them. There was an old section of the palace grounds no one entered anymore, half swallowed by thorns, shrouded in vines that never lost their color, even in winter. Once it had been called the Night Garden. Now it was only referred to in passing, and only by the oldest staff. The new ones didn't even know it existed. But Lena did. She had begun to walk there nightly, sometimes barefoot, always alone. It was there she first met the visitor, not a ghost, not a servant, something else. A figure cloaked in black feathers and thin mist, with a voice like cracking ice and thunder beneath water. It did not speak in words, but in memories. She remembered things she had never lived, a childhood among sand dunes, a wedding beneath a red eclipse, a betrayal in a tower without windows, a promise whispered into a dying lover's ear. And again, she remembered standing before a mirror saying, "Run." The visitor never told her its name, but it watched her the way a lantern watches a moth. Once, she asked it plainly, "What are you?" It responded by showing her a vision, Kaif kneeling in the red room, whispering into the mirror, "If you love me, don't follow." After that, Lena stopped sleeping altogether. She wrote by candlelight. She stared at walls that sometimes pulsed with slow, shuddering breath. She wept without knowing why. The book of whispers began writing itself. The quill moved while her hands remained still, and every night in the garden the visitor waited. Until one night it truly spoke. He is not dead. Not truly. But he is not yours anymore. Lena shook. Then whose is he? The visitor raised a hand, fingers tipped in bone, and pointed to her chest. He is hers. The next morning, the throne cracked, literally down the center, as if something had struck it from inside. The royal advisors gathered in hushed urgency. The queen's throne, an ancient seat carved from obsidian and cedar, older than the kingdom itself, had split in half overnight. No signs of intrusion, no tremors, no weather anomaly, just broken. And Queen Lena, she had not emerged from her chambers. When they finally forced open her door, they found her seated before a cracked mirror, eyes wide and bleeding at the edges, muttering a name none of them recognized. Really meme I are elit at dot. That night the moon turned black, not hidden by cloud, not hidden by cloud. Not an eclipse, but black, as if it had been erased. And in the night sky's new silence, Lena wrote again in the book of whispers, her hand a marionette, her mouth moving in time with each line, though no sound came out. When morning returned, she addressed the court. I have seen her, she said. The queen beneath the sea. The advisors looked at one another, unsure if it was metaphor or madness. She is the one Kaif loves now, Lena said with a soft smile. And I am to bring him back, not from death, but from her arms. A silence fell over the court so deep it felt like the entire world paused. Then one brave official asked, Your Majesty, this queen beneath the sea, is she real? Lena didn't blink. She is more real than me. From that day on, Lena stopped ruling. The kingdom was left to the ministers. She turned the western wing of the castle into a sanctuary of glass, water, salt, and obsidian. Seawater was piped into the halls. Strange silverfish swam in sealing tanks. The air always smelled of storm. And in the center of it all stood a new mirror, a black one. She called it the Sea Gate, and night after night she stood before it, whispering, Give him back. I can offer you more than her. I can build a temple in your name. But the mirror stayed still, until one night it rippled, and Kaif stepped through. He was not as he once was. His eyes were rimmed with coral. His voice carried an echo, and when he spoke, it was not to Lena. It was to the mirror. I told you never to follow. Queen Lena fell to her knees. Kaif stood before her, not as the boy she had loved in life, but as a man crowned by the sea. His skin shimmered faintly like scales beneath the surface. His breath smelled of salt and rusted anchors. But it was his eyes that stilled her heart. They held no memory of her, only distance. Only tide. Kaif, she whispered, it's me. I crossed silence and shadow to find you. Don't you remember? Kaif's head tilted slowly. I remember pain, he said, and I remember release. He turned to the mirror. She is listening now, he said. She knows you are here. Lena's hands trembled. Let her speak then. A moment later, the glass surface of the sea gate darkened, becoming impossibly deep like the mouth of an ancient ocean, and from it came a voice. Smooth as whale song and old as the abyss. You came for what was mine. You dared open the gate. You offered me temples, but I already have kingdoms beneath the waves. Lena stood, fury rising. I loved him. He was mine long before the sea touched him. If you took him unjustly, but the voice interrupted. He chose me, Kaif nodded, solemn. I chose her, Lena. I was dying. And she offered life, but not yours, hers. You think you speak with the dead, the sea voice whispered, but I speak with those still living after the world forgets them. Would you join them? The mirror rippled again. A hand reached through, pale, webbed, inviting. Lena's pulse thundered. Join the Sea Queen. Leave her kingdom. Her crown, her people. But in that moment, Cave whispered something only she could hear. If you come, you'll never return. But I'll remember you again. A single tear traced Lena's cheek. One step forward, then another. But she stopped at the glass. Turned to Cave. Then remember this. And she pressed her hand to his chest, where his heart had once beat, and whispered the last spell in the Book of Whispers. Cave collapsed. The sea gate shattered, and the tide receded. Back in her chambers, Lena clutched the broken book. Outside, the moon returned. But now it always wept. For days, Queen Lena did not speak. The sea gate was gone, shattered into 1,000 silver shards scattered across the floor of her chamber. The Book of Whispers had turned to salt in her hands. And Kaif, whatever remained of him, was no longer bound to either world. She had severed the bond between life and death. But at what cost? Her advisors, unaware of the true events, whispered of a divine dream of holy madness. Some said the queen had seen the face of God. Others claimed she had gone mad from grief. Only Leora, the scribe, knew the truth. She kept vigil at Lena's door, guarding the silence the queen now lived in. But on the 7th day, Lena finally rose from her bed. She walked barefoot through the palace, her white nightdress flowing behind her like a ghost. No one dared approach. The guards dropped to one knee. Servants bowed their heads. She passed the throne room, the chapel, the war chamber, and came instead to the Tower of Echoes. It was a forgotten place where royal families once whispered into jars, believing their words could be sealed and passed on to descendants. An old superstition. A quiet tower. She opened one of the jars, held it to her lips, and whispered, "My name is Lena. I was a queen. I crossed the veil to find love. I returned with nothing but this memory." She sealed the jar, set it beside 100 dusty others, then turned, her voice no longer shaking. "Call the court," she told Leora. "It is time the kingdom learns truth, not myth." That afternoon, the queen addressed her people from the balcony. Her voice rang like bells, carried by wind across every corner of the realm. There are gods who wait beneath the water, and there are men who lose themselves in the tides. But we are neither gods nor prey. We are fire, we are breath, we are love remembered. That night, for the first time in centuries, the people of Mera lit torches beside the sea, not in fear, but in mourning. And in love. Years passed. Queen Lena ruled with a calm wisdom that neither prophets nor warlords could explain. She spoke less and listened more. Her laws grew kinder. The dungeons emptied. The harbor bustled with peace ships from across the continent. But she never married. Some suitors came, kings, generals, poets, but none stayed. Lena wore no crown of roses or rings of gold. Her only jewel was a pendant that once belonged to Kaif, a shard of glass from the sea gate encased in silver, worn always at her throat. And then, one morning, she vanished. No guards, no entourage, no announcements. Only Leora knew where she went. On the edge of the kingdom stood an old lighthouse abandoned since the days of sea demons and cursed tides. It had once warned ships away from the black cliffs of Mero. Now it stood as her sanctuary. Lena spent her final days writing, not proclamations, not orders, but letters. She wrote to every soul who had ever crossed her path, childhood friends, forgotten tutors, servants she'd once spoken to only in passing. To each, she gave a memory, a kindness, a truth. But her final letter left sealed on her desk was addressed simply to the dead. I remember the way your hands moved when you told stories. I remember the wind in your hair and the scent of salt on your skin. I remember the fear in your eyes when you died, and I wish I had held you harder. This world could not hold you, so I built a new one from memory, and I live in it still. The letter was never sent. Perhaps it didn't need to be. The night Queen Lena passed away, the sea was calm, the stars unusually bright. Locals swore they saw a light in the sky, a faint blue flame drifting westward over the water, slow and steady, as if carried by a hand unseen. No temple was built in her name, no monument carved, but the people of Marrow did one thing. They rebuilt the lighthouse. And every year on the night of Lena's passing, they light the flames so that the dead might see the shore and the living might remember their queen. The kingdom of Marrow remained, but its borders changed and its rulers came and went. Still, each monarch who took the throne found themselves drawn to Lena's writings, her decrees and her journal entries collected in a dusty archive known as the Queen's Quiet. Inside were the accounts of her years as ruler, her visions, her conversations with the dead, or what she claimed were the dead, and her emotional entries about Kaif, the soldier who had first died for her, and then lived forever in her words. But most curious were the blank pages. Here and there, nestled between lines of flowing script, were entire sheets of untouched parchment. And yet, some said if you sat in the silence of the archive long enough, held your breath, and placed your ear close enough to those blank pages, ... you'd hear whispers, soft, like echoes underwater, sometimes laughter, sometimes weeping, always familiar. The myth grew children would dare each other to enter the room alone and listen. Lovers would go in hoping to hear each other's names. The brave would enter seeking counsel. The grieving would come simply to feel, and sometimes they left crying. Sometimes they left smiling. No one ever explained it. But one record, logged by an aging scribe near the end of his life, stood out. He claimed to have found a letter tucked between two of the blank pages. A letter not written by Queen Lena, but by someone else. Its ink shimmered faintly, like light on seawater. It read, "You remembered me. That is more than I deserved. And more than I ever hoped for." There was no name at the bottom. But those who knew the Queen's story understood. The tale of the Queen who spoke to the dead didn't end in tragedy. It drifted beyond it, like the tide, pulling memory and magic into the very soil of Marrow. And from that soil grew legends. In the centuries that followed, the story of Queen Lena became more than just royal history. It became a legend, a lullaby, a whispered truth parents told their children on stormy nights when the wind sounded too much like voices. They said the Queen had walked with the dead. They said she ruled not with iron but with memory. They said she had once kissed a ghost, and that she never stopped listening. No one knew where her final resting place truly was. Her tomb, though marked in the royal crypt, was always empty, an open sarcophagus with a crown laid gently inside and petals from a flower no longer found anywhere in the land. Some believed she still wandered, not in body, but in thought, in grief and in hope, that wherever a voice trembled with loss, Lena's spirit bent to listen, that when someone whispered a goodbye they hadn't been able to say in time, she heard it, and sometimes she answered, but always softly. The dead queen, they called her, not because she had died, but because she had understood death more than any soul before or after. And perhaps that's all anyone truly wanted from their queen. Not a savior, not a ruler, but someone who would understand. The end.